Well, hello to all of you out there, and welcome to this new edition of what we're calling Sacred Conversations. And today I'm really pleased to welcome Mazin Qumsiyeh to this space. Mazen is speaking to us today all the way from Bethlehem in the occupied territory of Palestine in the West Bank. So Mazen, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me on this.
Yeah, it is a pleasure and an honor. I'll say a little bit more about Mazen shortly, but let me start today just by saying that we're recording this conversation on Earth Day, which we'll be speaking about during the course of our conversation. Mazen is a biologist by training, and so it's a special for this conversation with him on this day in particular. But I hope that all of you out there will find some way to spend time outdoors today, perhaps on a forest trail near you on your own 2 feet, if you enjoy that freedom. I think one of the hidden blessings within this time of Corona is that we've gotten out of our vehicles and we've started to enjoy the natural world around us in an entirely new way. And so I hope that you're doing that today and every day. So we are 6 weeks into this experiment of social distancing, and it is affecting all of us in very different ways, though I would say profound ways. And I think that for many people, though certainly not all of us, social distancing has meant turning inward, focusing on our households or our own families, on our own cities or our towns or our states or our regions. And faith communities have of necessity done much the same thing, turning inward to ensure that the needs around us are being met. Now, I'm glad for that up to a point, but it's also incumbent upon people of faith and upon people of conscience to be cognizant of the world around us and of what other people are experiencing right now. And then to pay attention to the ways the virus has exposed and intensified all kinds of pre-existing conditions that make some people and some populations especially vulnerable to the ravages of COVID-19. In the US, that includes Black and brown and poor populations, but not only in the United States. That's true in places all around the world, and it is especially true in a place like Palestine. And so, yes, we must take care of the needs around us, but we must not allow the virus to render us myopic, focused only on what is near at hand, which is why it is such an honor to speak with Mazin Qumsiyeh today. Mazen has been a professor of biology at Duke and Yale universities, and he's consistently been a leading voice of conscience on peace and justice issues throughout the world, but especially in the Middle East. In 2008, Mazen and his wife Jessie made the decision to return to Palestine, choosing essentially to live in captivity, but living a life of solidarity with the Palestinian people. And once there, Mazen founded and he now directs the Palestine Museum of Natural History in Bethlehem, as well as the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University. The museum is a gorgeous oasis, not far from the separation wall, in a place where beauty can often be very difficult to find. Mazen has been a longtime friend of FCCOL and of the Tree of Life, and indeed he is somebody whose wisdom that I have benefited from immensely. It was Mazen who first coined the phrase wheels of justice, which we appropriated in our community for several of our journeys into the American South and then to Mexico. And Mazen used that phrase wheels of justice when he led protests against the Iraq War in the early 2000s. And it was Mazen from whom I borrowed the admonition to stay human, words that he uses to close all of his email epistles. And so Mazen, once again, thank you for being with us, and know how honored I am, know how honored all of us are to share in this conversation with you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Why don't we begin? I just want to begin by asking how you are, how your family is. We'll get to conditions in Palestine in just a little bit, but how are you, and how has this affected you?
Yeah, before I say that, I do want to say, because you mentioned the words wheels of justice, it was a bus that we actually traveled with around the US. I mean, the words wheels of justice are obviously I didn't invent those. It's one of those memes that we kind of build on, but it made me think of how humans are actually connected to each other in ways that we don't anticipate. The Wheels of Justice as a bus idea actually started from Pastors for Peace that was taking the bus to Mexico and other places to take care of poor people.
Yes.
And so we followed with that tradition. The words "stay human" are actually used by many people. I borrowed it, if you want, from Vittorio Arrigoni, an Italian activist who lived in Gaza and who was killed in Gaza. So it made me think of this issue of how we're all connected to each other, whether we live in, Cuba or Mexico or the US or Russia or Palestine, Israelis, Palestinians, Christians, Muslims, Jews, we're all connected.
Yes.
And we have certain ideas that we try to, I don't know how to describe it, we try to live our lives so that we are comfortable in our own skin, so that we are doing what we think is right. And if we believe in God, what God has called us to do in our short stage in life or a period in life, which can end any minute. And when we get things like the coronavirus, of course, we all start thinking about mortality. Actually, my brother and his wife, who live in the US, have not been tested, but the US doesn't have enough testing, but so they have fever and they have cough and they've been sequestered at home probably with the coronavirus. It makes us all think of our mortality, of our purpose in life, what we are doing in life. So when you ask me, how am I doing? I would say, how are we doing as humans, as a species? And the answer is not too good. The humans, today you mentioned Earth Day, 22 April is Earth Day. This is the 50th Earth Day. The first Earth Day came in 1970, shortly after that book Silent Spring came out, and about how the humans are destroying the planet and all of this stuff. And since then, more and more people are aware of our impacts on the environment. But being aware of injustice to our planet, of injustice to ourselves, to our communities, does not necessarily translate into actions. And my beef with us humans, mea culpa also, is that we are not doing enough. We are certainly not taking matters as seriously as we should. We still elect idiotic leaders, Democrats, Republicans in the US or in England, Labour Party versus Tories. We still kind of marginally do things, but not really take things very seriously. And we need to take things more seriously because we are really at an existential stage of the human existence on this planet. And if we don't take it seriously, after this coronavirus and before that, the catastrophe that's ongoing still with the climate change and the risk of nuclear war and many other things, if we don't act, not just be aware, if we don't act, we are all not going to be healthy, so to speak. And so my health as an individual is part of the health of my community. The world is a very small blue planet. I always remind myself, because I have a picture in front of me that shows that we are a small planet. And even my post on Facebook that I just posted 10 minutes ago showed the picture of the blue planet that we share. And we really need to take it seriously, which will help us all be healthier physically, mentally, communities, etc.
Yeah. No, I think that's really, really helpful. Just thinking through those issues of interconnectivity and the ways in which we're not isolated selves, but indeed we become selves only through our relationality to other people and other entities all around the planet. So I think that's a really, really helpful thing. I want to get back to that a little bit later in our conversation. But if we could right now, would you be willing to narrate your journey just a little bit? You talked about the Wheels of Justice trip that you did here in the United States, but at a certain point, you made a very conscious decision that you weren't going to proceed as usual here in the United States, but you were going to return to Palestine, to your people, and to reside there, to teach there, to create a better life there.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit. I think that's a remarkable story.
Right. Yeah. I mean, let me just start by saying from my childhood, I used to love nature and go out into the wild and enjoyed nature and watching birds, collecting insects. My love of nature and biology goes back to when I was about 8 years old. And I have traveled the road whereby I went and got a PhD in biology in the US. And then I did some medical genetics training. And then, as you mentioned, I work at Yale and Duke University. I thought this was all going to be a temporary phase, and indeed it was. Maybe it took longer than I should have. In other words, I should have returned to Palestine maybe a bit earlier. But the work anywhere is still connected and very important. Our work in the US, whether on environmental issues, on human justice issues, racial justice, violence against women, etc. All this work is connected to environmental work, and I really believed that from the beginning. And my way of making a living, whether in medical genetics or as a professor or as a researcher, was mostly just to live a small part in that work sphere, if you want, and a larger part in what I call the public sphere of communities, etc. Mm-hmm. And the contrast, if I may say so, and in reflection, for example, I was at Yale University between December 1999 and December 2005. This period at Yale, for example, showed me something interesting about humanity. Yale is still part of the world of the college education, whether in the US or here, where they still produce consumers rather than active citizens, consumers of information, consumers of products, etc. And I used to have a lot of disagreement with the administration at Yale on these issues. One, for example, they would discourage their students from just walking across the street to go to the inner city areas where most blacks lived in New Haven. And they would say it's not safe and things like that. Well, to me, this was not acceptable. And to me, I thought it was essential that people who are privileged to go to Yale, I wasn't privileged to go as a student to Yale, I was a professor in the medical school there. But anyways, I thought it was important that people mix and know about each other and know what's going on and know the injustice of things. So I really, my work sphere, if you want, was much contradicting my other sphere of actions, and eventually I gave up on all of that in 2005 and started to plan my return home and to work here, where I felt I could contribute more to young people developments and to working for justice issues here. And I mean, I still think the work in the US is very important, but but certainly the challenge here is much, much more. And as the Chinese say, you know, when you have more crises, you have more opportunities. So I have a lot more opportunities to contribute here.
Yes, yes,
That's
yes.
basically my philosophical, if you want, journey, as well as a physical journey I took.
Yeah. So one of the things I love when I am able to lead trips to Palestine, and it's worth saying that last month we were due to visit you at the Palestine Natural History Museum. But one of the things I love is being able to bring people to your facility and to show them this beautiful place. Would you describe a little bit what it's like? I mean, you've got all kinds of things going on there. Not only a museum like inside, but yeah, you're doing all kinds of.
Yeah, I mean, it's for me, of all the projects I engaged in my life, and I'm 63 years old now, this was the best project so far I have been engaged in, because
Yeah.
it founded an oasis in Bethlehem, in the
Yes.
middle of this mayhem, in the middle of this conflict, whereby, you know, to go back to old Chinese sayings, better light a candle than curse the darkness. Yes, of course, we can complain about the occupation and colonization, the ethnic cleansing that resulted in 7.5 million of us Palestinians now being refugees or displaced people. But the question remains always is, what am I going to do about it? What is my role as an individual? What's our roles as communities? How do we get people together and towards what end? And so the Institute basically started with volunteers. We didn't have a single employee for the first year, and we didn't have a single penny from outside of Palestine. All of it was our own donations. My wife and I donated what we saved in the US when I worked at Yale and Duke, $250,000. We donated them to Palestine University to start this. And so the idea was, when we gathered the volunteers, what is it that we want to do, and why do we want to do this? Well, it's very simple, really, what came up, and everybody kind of came up with it almost simultaneously, is that we want a center here which will produce positive energy for local people and for international people, and give us basically a choice of action, a choice of positive action in the middle of difficult circumstances. So the vision of the museum is sustainable human and natural communities. We need to sustain humanity and here native people, etc. But we also need to sustain our environment. That's a vision. And the mission is to use research, education, and conservation to achieve this vision. The motto for the museum is respect. Basically, we have to respect ourselves as people. We can't, like Donald Trump always blames other people. We need to start looking in the mirror and say, hey, what am I doing, you know? And so it's self-respect. That's empowerment, you know. In the civil rights movement in the old days, I used to say, free your mind and your ass will follow. So we have to free our minds first. Is what is it that we are doing as oppressed people, if you want, as people, although, you know, the Israelis feel that they are oppressing me, I say so as oppressed people, so to speak, because I don't feel oppressed. Freedom is up here in the mind, you know, not out there. You know, I can be in jail and I can feel more free than Donald Trump or Netanyahu, for that matter.
Yes.
It's freedom in the mind. You know, do I choose to be free in my mind, or do I choose to be, you know, in the case of slavery, for example, would I choose to be a house slave with a free mind, or without a free mind, or a field slave with a free mind? Which one do I choose, a house slave or or a field slave. And I hope if I was born into that circumstances, I would choose to be a field slave, even under the whip of the house slave. So that's the freedom we are looking for. That's the self-respect. So we say our motto is respect. Number one, for ourselves. Number two, for other human beings. And number three, for nature. And they have to come in that order.
Yes.
This is the vision of the museum. Now, in terms of what it does, based on this vision, mission, and motto and the goals, it becomes very clear what you can do. I give you just random examples very quickly off the top of my head. For example, today I went into the garden and I harvested some of the community garden fruits and vegetables, because the owners of these plots, we have a community garden, and the owners who couldn't get to their plots, if you want, couldn't come to harvest because of the corona restrictions. So I harvested some of their vegetables, fruits, etc., and tended to their areas. And I feel, but we were very lucky, because not only did we bring 32 families who have plots here to grow their own vegetables and fruits, and etc., but we went and built for them gardens in their own houses. Some of them who live in refugee camps, for example, they don't have a garden next to their house. So we did it on their balcony, or on their roof, or on the sides of the walls. And we did this almost a year ago now. But this coronavirus, when it came and made people stick to their homes, you can imagine how this small mini garden that they developed in their houses have been a positive energizing force for them, and ability to produce some simple herbs and vegetables and simple things like that.
Yes.
And that's just one example of many that we do that empower people, that encourages them to have that self-respect, respect for others, and respect for nature.
Right, right. This gets at one of the things that I've admired most about your work, but it's the ability to integrate that biological understanding. I mean, just tending a garden, for example, with these wider social justice issues, with claims about our deeper humanity, and how those two things work together. I think that very often people tend to do one or the other, but integration is something that I see happening certainly in the museum there, but in all of your work. Can you say more about that? I mean, I think it's unusual, actually.
Well, I think it's actually fairly natural, if I may use that word, because if you look at the ecosystems, for example, outside a forest or a brook, and you look at it and you see the diversity, you say that's a healthy forest. There's diversity, there's lots of birds, lots of animals, and each depends on each other. So there is diversity is strength.
Yes.
What bothers me about people like Trump or Netanyahu or colonialism in general is they are against diversity, and they want, what do they want? They want uniformity.
That's right, right.
So Israel, when it was created, for example, just, because I live here, I have to give examples from here. Israel was created in 1948. One of the first few projects they did is they ethnically cleansed the native Palestinian villages, over 500 villages and towns. With their orchards, they bulldozed their orchards, all their trees, olive trees, almonds, figs, etc., hawthorn, and they planted the uniform forest of European pine trees. Again, instead of agro-biodiversity, they have now a monolithic agriculture.
Yeah, yeah.
Very devastating for the environment, of course. And this is just one example. They did many other examples, of course. They removed, we used to be a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious society, and they want to create a Jewish state. It's against the idea of diversity. It's the idea of uniformity. Sort of like the Nazis also, they wanted this white, homogeneous German-speaking Aryan population, or South Africa under apartheid, for that matter. And these people who are driven by greed, mostly by money, are more interested in this uniformity that they imagine is possible and that they imagine it's sustainable when they can't understand it's not sustainable. We work against it, but we work against it, I would dare to say we have to work smart. Because we cannot work against it, for example, by saying we want the opposite. They have strong nationalism, we should have strong nationalism, you know? That is not working smart. No, if we are for diversity, whether in nature and in human societies, what we have to do is promote that diversity, that respect for other human beings, regardless of their religion or skin color or sex or whatever.
Yes.
This is what undermines what basically philosophical underpinning, as I said, for our work. But of course, we face hardships, and I mean, I don't want to underestimate the hardships we face. Even doing a museum of natural history sounds innocuous, but Israel does everything in its power to prevent us from doing what we are doing. And to even books, bringing books here. You know, I see behind you a bookshelf, and behind me a bookshelf. Much of the books behind me were actually brought to us by volunteers and people like you. When they come and visit us, they bring us stuff. Because we cannot just simply import them like any other country. We cannot even use alcohol 100% for my molecular biology. We're not allowed.
Wow.
I have to smuggle it. Formaldehyde, I have to smuggle it. You know, there are many things that are not allowed for us. But we continue to work. And I think, you know, what we have to always, you know, when there's a will, there's a way. I tell my students and at Bethlehem University, Birzeit University, and I think it's possible to do a lot even under very, very difficult circumstances.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Well, that's a great way of transitioning, I think, into talking about what's happening in Palestine as the coronavirus and as these very difficult measures have come into play about social distancing. I'm curious how that's affecting Palestinians in particular. I think what the virus has done for a lot of people around the world is just to magnify or intensify pre-existing conditions of wealth inequality, of lack of affordable health care, all this sort of thing, racism, xenophobia. It's actually magnified and intensified that even more intensely. So in a place like Palestine, which had already been subject to so much of that, how has that intensified? How has the coronavirus intensified?
Well, I mean, first we have to realize that we live in an apartheid regime, just like in South Africa under apartheid, under a white minority government that ruled the country. The blacks were relegated to Bantustans, ghettos, if you want, concentration camps, whatever you want to call them. I like to call them people warehouses where Palestinians are stored in densely populated areas like open air prisons.
Yes.
Including, by the way, Bethlehem and Gaza, for example. Gaza with 2 million people, Bethlehem University with 250,000 people, basically caged in with walls and separation checkpoints, etc.
Yeah.
So we live in this very surreal, you know, Orwellian system of walls and segregations and apartheid. It is not like we have Israel here and Palestine here. No, we have Israel on top of Palestine. It's an apartheid regime that occupies all of Palestine and was created in Palestine and took most of the land and left the remaining people most of the Palestinians are refugees outside the country, but the remaining people are in those ghettos, concentration areas.
Yeah.
I describe this situation so that your listeners, watchers, can understand the context of the coronavirus invasion, if you want.
Mm-hmm.
So we had the virus of the colonization, the virus of apartheid, the virus of occupation, the virus of colonial settlements, the virus of home demolitions and walls and repression and apartheid already here long before we had this new virus of corona.
Yep.
When corona showed up, it actually affected Israelis first.
Mm-hmm.
And then because they are more globalist, they can travel around, they bring a lot of coronas. We're in prison, basically.
Yep.
The first cases of corona showed up among the Palestinian population when a Greek tourist delegation that was visiting Bethlehem apparently had some infected members, and the hotel workers where they were staying in Bethlehem area got infected, and that's how we got the first few cases. We have now 3 main sources of coronavirus in the Palestinian population. One is tourists, which now ended, of course, because Israel and the Palestinian Authority eventually, Palestinian Authority was first, actually, said no more tourists, we don't want tourists. And that's why your delegation, unfortunately, couldn't come back also under these circumstances. Nobody is traveling. And then Israel also closed for tourism. So that was one source of our infections. The second source of infections was the settlers, colonial settlers who are living among us, basically. And people don't realize this, because again, as I said, it's not like there's Israel here, Palestine here. It's on top of us, and so there are colonial settlements in Bethlehem interacting with Palestinians and bringing us viruses. And the third source of infections have been Palestinian labor workers, indentured laborers, basically, that go work in Israeli areas and the settlements, building Israeli colonies, etc. Even building the wall, Palestinians help build a wall, just like I don't know, it's I'm sure the blacks in South Africa helped build a lot of the infrastructure of apartheid in that state, because they're desperate for jobs and they can't do anything because Israel took all sources of income. So anyway, those are the 3 sources of infections that are coming into the Palestinian areas. Even though personally I disagree with the Palestinian Authority on a lot of political and other issues, I think on the issue of health and the quarantine and all of this, that they have done a very good job. I must commend the Ministry of Health, Palestinian Dr. May Kaila, who's a friend of mine as a minister, did a remarkably good job of isolation, telling people, disseminating information, etc. So even now, when cases are peaking, as you know, in the US, coming up really significantly in Israel, now there are like 13,000 cases with nearly 200 deaths. Among the Palestinians, we have about 460 cases with 4 deaths.
Okay.
This is a remarkable success, if you want, that we should pat ourselves on the back with.
Yes.
But of course, as you pointed out, our economy was devastated already because we were under colonialism.
That's right.
So we're not coming from a strong economy to face this massive lockdown with no employment. We're coming from 40% unemployment to become 90% unemployment, for example.
Man.
The US was going from 4 or 5% unemployment to 10, 15, whatever percent unemployment. So the scale of difference is huge.
Right.
And thus the impact on the population and the needs of the population is dramatic. And I especially worry about Gaza, which is 2 million people, highly impoverished. Already 50% of the population is under the poverty line. And with this coronavirus, as it continues, the number is likely to go to 70, 80, maybe 90% under the poverty line.
Yeah, yeah. No, Gaza is so incredibly vulnerable right now, and I too worry about what happens if the virus spreads through Gaza. That would be a disaster.
There's already 17 cases in Gaza, and I expect it will spread and it will be pretty bad. But let's keep our fingers crossed, and as I said, hopefully better. But the occupiers carry a huge responsibility. But we have to remember that Gaza is still under occupation, and according to international law, the health of the local population is the responsibility of the occupier. And the occupier really doesn't care, and in fact, even intentionally infecting Palestinians. Many countries have released prisoners. For example, Israel has 5,000 Palestinian political prisoners. They released hundreds of their, criminal Israelis who are caught for other crimes, not political things. And they didn't release a single Palestinian. The only Palestinians they released in the past 2 or 3 weeks was a Palestinian who was infected with the coronavirus and his health was deteriorating. And so they released him. They actually released him, dumped him at the checkpoint. And the Palestinian Authority checked him and he was positive, and he informed them that he had interacted with 40 other prisoners. So I worry about the situation in crowded prisons.
Of course.
Just like in the US, we have to remember 2.3 million people are in prisons.
Yes, of course.
And nobody is really paying attention to the health of the prisoners.
Right. Tell me about resources. I mean, are there adequate resources? I mean, there already are not adequate resources in Palestine, but under the conditions of coronavirus, things like food or medical necessities, anything like that. What is this doing to Palestinian society in that regard?
Well, the situation is pretty bad, and we need support, we need help, and I know FCCOL and others have contributed money and food packaging. I even delivered some food packages myself to people. I've given money from my own pocket to people who need money, etc. Yes, it's pretty bad when, a lot of the population was unemployed to begin with, and those who were employed were barely employed. They weren't making barely enough for their food. When you talk about like making $20 a day as labor in building or something like that, you really had to live off of that. And once that is cut, now we are in the 7th week. They don't have savings. People don't have savings to rely on. So you can imagine what the situation is pretty bad.
Yeah. Well, if there are ways that we here in the United States, that we here at FCCOL and within Tree of Life can help, please do let us know, and we can talk about that after we're done recording, and I can get that information out. But I'm curious. I have a couple more questions I want to get into. I'm curious if you're willing to say, what does the U.S. look like to you from your vantage in Palestine at this point? I mean, you have experience in both places, and I think you're uniquely poised to be able to diagnose some of the social ills that we in the U.S. are experiencing right now. So yeah, if you're willing to go there, I don't know.
Yes, I am willing. First of all, I am a U.S. citizen, so I have a right to criticize what I consider my second home, my government, the U.S. government. And the U.S. government and the U.S. system has unfortunately been going down the hill. The American century, that is the 20th century, is coming to a close. As the Roman Empire ended, the American Empire is ending. It's very, very difficult transition, and it's full of pitfalls. And like with the Roman Empire, in the last days of the Roman Empire, much destruction happens, much dislocation, many problems. And the U.S. empire hopefully will shed its empire garb in a more dignified way, in my hope and in my prayers, basically. Let me say this: if I read the U.S. history very well, and when you look at our history as American citizens and what had happened, there were, of course, a lot of horrible things that the U.S. government did, all the way going back to, what we did to the Native American, the genocide of the Native Americans in the beginning, the genocide of the Black African Americans that were brought as slaves, these genocides, these two genocides, I think, kind of frame, bracket, if you want, our history. But our history, and you can list many other problems, but our history also, if you think of the positive things that happened and how they happened in America, it's remarkable. How did we get women right to vote? How did we get civil rights? How did we get to end the war in Vietnam? How did we get to end U.S. support for apartheid in South Africa? All of these things happened because we had people like you and I who worked on this day and night to try and change things. And I think, you can look at the cup half full or cup half empty, but I do worry about the U.S. standards of discourse. I mean, if you read even the letters of civil rights soldiers, you're impressed by the intellectual ability of these people. Whereas now you watch Facebook or Twitters of even the commander-in-chief, and you can see where we have reached from the rhetoric of somebody like Thomas Jefferson to the rhetoric of the idiots that run the country now. I think, we are in trouble. And when you think that people like that have their hands on nuclear weapons, it's very, very dangerous. And the U.S. withdrawing from the climate change accords, even though they are minimal and not sufficient, the U.S. withdrawing from nuclear treaties, the U.S. withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, all of these things portray for us a path that is down the hill, economically, socially, politically, in every way. I hope that we, the people, can reverse this tide and come back like the actions we used to have in the 1960s as a people, for example. I think there is a potential for change, and maybe the coronavirus could be a wake-up call, but maybe it's not. I don't know. Hopefully it is.
Yeah, hopefully. Time will tell, but that's my sincere hope too, that we'll use this time to reflect on who we wish to be and who we might yet become. But who knows? Who knows? Time will tell. I guess here's the question that's that we've been circling all around, and we've talked about a little bit. But I want to end with this actually, because as you say, it is a matter of how we want to look at the situation. It is a matter of what we want to emphasize. And I guess my real question is, how do we stay human in this moment? I'm curious how you're staying human, and I'm curious what it would mean for all of us to stay human right now. What does that mean to you now? What do we need to be doing as individuals and as a collective?
I mean, there are some people who complained about me using the terminology of Vittorio, as I said, the Rigoni, stay human, because they said, well, humans are not such a great species anyway. Look at what we have done to the planet. So if we look at stay human in the sense of the positive sense of the best of humanity, I think, it becomes very obvious what that means. When you look at how much people help each other, how much neighbors help each other, how much even here. I mean, I can tell you story after story of hungry people even going and sharing a piece of bread with their neighbor or something like that.
Mm.
I think it's remarkable, and I think it's sorry, but it's very touching for me when I see how much human beings care for each other and how they don't develop this greed of rampant capitalism and me.
Mm.
There are so many good people doing great things, and we ought to emphasize those.
Yes, yes, indeed.
And for me, it's also going back to nature, because nature has a lot of lessons to teach us. And you know, as long here it's spring, for example, things are blooming. Here, Jesse just put this. My wife put this on my desk. Flowers, things are blooming, are growing. We need to grow like that. We need to always renew, just like the spring, renew our energies, renew our stamina, and keep hope alive, as they used to say.
Yes, yes, yes. That's a beautiful way to, I think, bring our conversation to a close. I think it's a lovely thing to say. Several things that I want to emphasize. I love your use of that proverb, that Chinese proverb, that you can either light a candle or you can curse the darkness, and better to light the candle than to curse the darkness. I think that is exactly what we need to be doing right now. But this notion of staying human and of focusing on the ways in which this actually is bringing out the best in so many people. Not everybody, but so many people.
Actually, that's a very good point. Crisis always exposes the truth and brings out the person's inner core, whether it's good or bad. For some people, crisis make them expose themselves to be the hypocrites, the liars, the whatever greedy people they are, much more. And for other people who are silent, whatever, the crisis exposes the best in those people.
Yes.
So
Yes.
crises are always good tests. You know, God sends us these crises maybe to test us, to see what's our metal is made from.
Right. And we have choices within this crisis, choices of how to behave and how to respond. And I think that's something worth emphasizing. Well, I want to close this, if I could, by reading a poem that you included in one of your recent email epistles from W.H. Auden, which I thought was just beautiful. I think the title is "Defenseless Under the Night." So if it would be okay, I'd like to read that. And okay. Well, Mazen always has wonderful quotes, pieces of literature that he discovers that are very, very hopeful and very helpful in his communications. And one of his recent emails included this poem. And so this is W.H. Auden, "Defenseless Under the Night." Our world in stupor lies, yet dotted everywhere, ironic points of light flash out wherever the just exchange their messages. May I, composed like them of eros and of dust, beleaguered by the same negation and despair, show an affirming flame. Show an affirming flame. I love it. I love it. Well, listen, Mazen, this has been a true joy for me to be able to talk to you, but just I think for all of our viewers to be able to hear from you, to hear what's happening in Palestine, and to be reminded of these, I think, essential truths of our humanity right now, that we are connected, that we're connected to one another across all of our differences throughout all of our diversity, and that we're connected to the natural world as well. And that enhancing that diversity is our common task in this time of coronavirus.
It's an honor to be with you, Stephen, with all the audience. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Mazen. And with that, I'll say to all of you who have been watching out there, thank you for watching, and love to all of you, love to you in this time of corona. We'll see you next time, and thanks again for being with us. I hope you're well, stay safe, and as Mazin Qumsiyeh says, stay human. All right, we'll see you. Bye.